I nearly pissed myself after a loud scream woke me in the middle of the night. I looked up to find Stephanie standing at the foot of our bed. After my heart slowed down a little, I glared at my wife, who then got up and started trying to control her sister. "Have you heard the news, guys? I'm so excited," Stephanie shouted in Katie's face. "What news, honey?" Katie said softly while stroking her sister's hair. By that time, I had wiped away the grogginess from my eyes and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the entire thing unfold. "You'll see. You'll be so proud of me, sis," Stephanie screamed again while staring at the wall over Katie's shoulder. Katie coddled her as they walked back down the hall to Stephanie's room. So here's the deal. Stephanie had been going through a crappy time in her life. After ending a crappy marriage to a crappy guy, since then she'd been staying with us. Yay me, right? Well, anyway, Stephanie's solution to the stress, at first, was to drown her sorrows away with liquor and anything else she could get her hands on, for that matter. So nighttime emotional outbursts had kind of become the norm when she had first moved in, but nothing anywhere near like that night. Hell, she hadn't even been drinking at that point. For a few days after that night, Stephanie continued to act really odd. I mean, the weirdest part of the whole ordeal is that she was completely fine during the day. Obviously, a little crying here and there, but not psycho like she was at night. She was even going to therapy sessions, for goodness sake. After a few other really strange incidences, Katie really started to push me to talk to her, since she had gotten nowhere. I finally gave in, after Stephanie woke us up again one night with her babbling. I sat her down at the kitchen table, trying to figure out what the hell was actually going on. I watched her for a minute, after we both sat down. She was staring at the light on the ceiling and mumbling something. I had no idea what to even say at that point. "You, been drinking again?" I asked first. Stephanie's attention snapped to me at the sound of my voice. She held her head sideways and giggled out loud. "No, silly old Evan. Remember you guys took all the booze away? Plus I can't risk hurting my baby," she answered plaintively in a childlike tone. She rubbed her stomach while she stared at me. I was completely shocked and confused. There was no way in hell that girl was pregnant. She was thin as a rail and hadn't even seen a man for months, as far as I knew. I honestly had no idea how to respond to what she had said. I finally decided to just play along to her delusions. "So, you want to tell me about the baby?" Stephanie's eyes lit up after hearing the word baby, and she could barely keep herself in the chair. "Oh my goodness. I'm so excited. You and Katie should be too. After all, you guys will be the aunt and uncle." She blurted all this out without even taking a single breath. Once she finished, she just stared at me smiling with really wide eyes. I glanced over at Katie, who was standing behind the door to the other room. She looked more than a little distraught about what she had just heard from her sister's mouth. I shrugged my shoulders and turned back to Steph. "Okay, that's good, I guess. So, Steph, is James the father?" Hearing the dirtbag ex-husband's name caused Stephanie to trail off for a moment. I thought maybe I had said the one thing that would bring her back to reality. I quickly realized that I was wrong, when she shook her head and continued smiling at me. "Nope," she replied in her sing-song voice. "Well then, so how exactly did you get pregnant if it wasn't by James?" That was the only other thing I could think to say then. I prayed, and my prayers were finally answered. James never wanted a baby, but in the end, I didn't even need him. My baby boy is going to be great. She continued staring down while she cradled her flat belly. She was even humming a little tune. I had enough of her nonsense by that point. "Well, okay then, Steph, have fun with that," I told her as I stood up from the table. I left the kitchen and met Katie in the hall. I told her that we should really consider having Stephanie committed somewhere. Of course, Katie cried and argued with me about it, but I think she understood in her heart. We hugged for a moment, and she said that she'd get her sister back to bed. So I went and hopped in bed myself, trying to shake off the whole weird-ass Stephanie situation. I woke up at some point hours later. The first thing I did was nervously scan around the room to make sure Psycho Stephanie wasn't lurking in the shadows somewhere. Content with not seeing her, I stumbled into the bathroom to take a leak. As I was getting back in bed, I heard Stephanie mumbling something from her bedroom down the hall. Katie had apparently heard it too, because she was already up and headed that way. I sat down on the bed and started Googling some nearby mental health places while I waited on Katie to come back to bed. My entire body shook and the phone flew from my hands when a loud shriek came out of the hallway. I sprang up and ran out of the room towards the terrifying sound. I found Katie slumped over on the floor, leaning against the wall and sobbing uncontrollably. Her finger was pointed towards the open door into the other bedroom. I darted into the room and found Stephanie sitting on the floor with her back towards me. She was completely naked, covered in blood, and rocking softly. I took a step towards her and my foot landed in something wet. Disgusted by the feeling, I looked down to find the crimson-soaked carpet under my feet. The thick, dark stream of blood continued all the way to where she was sitting. Stephanie's head slowly turned to look at me as her jaw moved back and forth. I could hear her lips smacking against one another. Long strands of what looked like bloody flesh dangled from her mouth as she loudly chomped on it. A trail of bright red blood cascaded off of her chin, covering the front of her body. "Look at him, Evan. Isn't he so perfect?" she said as I slowly walked forward. Bits of flesh flew from her mouth when she spoke. She continued to gnaw on the meaty strands as I walked closer. It became obvious that she was cradling something with both arms. I cautiously looked down at what she was holding and found what looked like a bloody clump of raw meat. The fleshy strands that hung from her mouth were connected to the abomination that rested in her arms. With a loud slurp, she sucked the rest of the amniotic sac into her mouth. I watched as two little bloody legs flopped out while she continued devouring the flesh. There were no feet attached to the legs, only round nubs at the ends. Stephanie moved it around in her lap, and two handless arms limply hung from the ball of mangled flesh. She kept humming it. She kept humming to it the entire time. I was horrified at what I was witnessing. A loud gasp escaped my mouth when it started twitching and writhing. "Stephanie, what the hell is that thing?" I shakily asked her, gagging on each word. She giggled while wiping it clean with a shirt. "It's my baby boy. Someone finally answered my prayers." She held the disfigured, vile-looking creation up in the air. As the blood and bile oozed away from it, I saw the outline of a deformed baby. My eyes darted all over the body, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. I just couldn't make myself believe what I was saying. I fell back onto the carpet next to her. The shock and terror wouldn't allow me to stop staring at it. "Say hi to your uncle, Evan, my little one," she whispered. Stephanie wiped the afterbirth away from the head. That's when I saw the eyes. They were black as night and emptily staring at me. She turned it around to face me. That's when I saw the two long horns protruding from the baby's head. "Dad, Mom won't get out of the bath," my 8-year-old son Lucas informed me with relative calmness as he came downstairs for breakfast. "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow in curiosity. An odd statement, I thought. But he didn't seem distressed. It was more like he was making an offhanded comment. "Yeah, she's just in there. I think she's asleep again," he explained, as he sat down at the table with an exasperated huff. I could tell the poor kid was fed up, and I couldn't blame him. His mother, my heavenly wife, was known to pull stunts like this. She suffers from bipolar disorder, and when she doesn't take her medication and comes down from a high, she comes down hard, which takes its toll on all of us. It gets difficult to explain why Mommy doesn't want to come downstairs, or why she's always the one to make an embarrassing scene at school events, without upsetting the kids, but I do the best I can. Now, while I do love her endlessly, I also have to admit that it's tiring to deal with, and since it's not uncommon for her to pick a part of the house and refuse to move from it for days on end, I wasn't really concerned either. The only unusual thing is that she would usually choose the bed or the couch as her spot, somewhere comfortable. Though I guess I wouldn't put it past her to decide on the bathtub either. All right, thanks for letting me know, champ. I'll go get her. You just eat your breakfast and keep an eye on Lucy for me, okay? I instructed, and gestured to where his little sister sat in her high chair, mashing food around in her bowl. Okay, he answered simply. He was pretty used to looking after her when my wife wouldn't and when I wasn't home. If I'm honest, I always felt a twinge of guilt over it, but there was little I could do. I made my way upstairs to our bathroom to where I could hear my wife singing, well, more humming really, from the bathroom. It wasn't a tune I knew, though it was melodic and had a hauntingly beautiful quality to it. I smiled softly to myself hearing her. Of course, she was singing. Maybe she was having a good day after all. Upon reaching the bathroom, I knocked lightly on the door before opening it, as she answered cheerfully, "Come in." "Hey, Pumpkin, what are you doing?" I asked cautiously, unsure that I really wanted to know the answer as I examined the scene before me. There were bottles of various soaps thrown all around, their contents strewn about the walls and ceiling, creating a mosaic splat of goo, and the bath mat seemed to be missing from the room entirely. The towel rack hung broken beside the bathtub where it had smashed the tiles as it fell, which in turn meant that there was tile shards and sprinkles of plaster coating the floor. All this chaos while my wife sat in the bathtub quite happily. She smiled up at me as she rested against the back of the tub, with her torso and head out of the water. She was, naturally, also completely naked, except for a drenched towel that covered her lower half. "I'm a mermaid now," she announced proudly, and flopped her legs under the towel as if they were joined. "Ah, I can see that," I agreed, as I caught on that she'd probably placed the towel there to represent her mermaid tail. "Do you want to join me? You can be a merman. It'll be so much fun," she tried to coax me. "I mean, it sounds good, but don't you want to come down and see Lucas and Lucy? I bet they'd love to see you," I suggested, gently trying to convince her. "No," she said firmly, and then continued in a sweet voice. "I don't want to. I can see them later. Just come play. The water is really nice," my wife insisted. I gave a small sigh, rubbing my hand over my face. "Anja, sweetheart, have you been taking your medicine?" I asked as neutrally as I could. With my question, her smile quickly turned to a scowl and she sneered. "You don't believe me. You never know how to have any fun anymore. You're so closed off. You're always trying to put me down. Go away. I don't want you here. Go away," she shouted, thrashing and splashing water at me as she screamed. She was making quite a ruckus, and I was worried the neighbors might hear her, so I backed out of the room respectively. I could tell that she obviously hasn't been taking her medications, and that nothing I could say was going to get through to her while she was in this state. So I made the decision that I would get Lucas off to school and call my parents to see if they could watch over the kids for a couple days while I dealt with her mood. Thankfully, my parents were more than happy to look after their grandchildren, and judging by the look on their faces, when they came to pick up Lucas and Lucy, they probably understood that the reason they were needed was related to Anja. With the kids gone, I spent the entire rest of the day trying to convince my wife to come out of the bath. For the most part, she ignored my pleading and instead just continued to sing to herself, even going as far as to get louder when I tried to speak. In a way, her humming was useful since I could hear it from anywhere in the house, It meant that I could move about fairly freely and still know that she was okay in the tub. When I thought she'd calmed down a bit, I attempted to talk to her again. "Anja, I made you some food. Do you want to give it a go?" I asked softly as I carefully re-entered the room. She ignored my question and my presence at first, folding her arms and continuing to hum, so I prompted again. "It's your favorite, salmon with garlic and ginger." This at least got a response. She turned to me slightly and growled, "I'm a mermaid. I can't eat fish. Are you crazy?" She yelled again, and I realized my mistake. "Oh, yeah, right, sorry." I apologized quickly and removed the dish from her sight. After that, I resolved to try another tactic. "Honey, don't you want to get out a moment so that we can change the water? It's getting cold by now, isn't it?" "I don't care. I like it cold," she answered bluntly, leaving me dumbfounded. I had never considered that she'd actually want to stay in cold water. Out of the other ideas, I settled on turning up the heating in the home in hopes of keeping her warm, and left her to splash about and sing to herself. The following day, I came to check on her early. I knew she was still okay because she was still singing, but I wasn't prepared for the odor that would hit me when I entered the room. I realized fairly quickly that she had relieved herself in the bathtub rather than leave the water, and the stench was enough to make me gag. At this point, I resorted to begging her to get out of the bath, at least to allow me to change the water, but she outrightly refused. When I tried to remove her forcefully, she kicked, scratched, and even bit me, making it impossible for me to get her out. So in the filth, she remained. She called it the essence of a mermaid. I can say without any guilt that I was about ready to give up, then and there. Now I know this next part will sound stupid of me, but I just want you to know that everything ended up fine and that the smell was too much for any man to endure. So I left her alone for 10 minutes while I raced down to the store to buy some air fresheners. If she wasn't going to let me get rid of the putrid water, I had at least hoped against hope that she'd allow me to hang air fresheners around the place. When I returned home, as I said, she was fine, still happily humming away to herself as she marinated in squalor, and I was quick to hang up the air purifiers. Her smell was by now perforating the house. It's a wonder the neighbors didn't get a whiff. I fell asleep that night inadvertently from exhaustion while listening to her melody and breathing in the sweet, calming scent of vanilla. When I awoke the next morning, I rushed to check on her. I had forgotten about her when I fell asleep and panic gripped me. I raced to the bathroom and found to my relief that she was still generally all right. Her skin was getting a little blotchy from the cold despite having the room heated, and when I touched her hand, I was horrified that some of the skin had just slopped off. Yelping in surprise, I recoiled, but she didn't seem to mind. "It's okay. I have to lose my human skin to become a full mermaid," she assured me with an unsettling smile. "Oh, of course, yeah," I agreed quickly, not wanting to send her into another rage. Honestly, I thought if she moved about too much, like she might if she got mad and started thrashing, that all her skin would fall off her limbs like a cheap costume. It was in those moments that I decided enough was enough. I couldn't continue the gentle, wait for her to come out of it approach anymore. I decided to call in her psychiatrist, Samantha. It was my hope that she'd be able to convince my wife to get out of the tub, and once I explained the urgency of the situation, she agreed to come over as soon as she could. I paced back and forth as I waited and met her anxiously at the door. When I opened it, wafting aromas of feces and vanilla hit her square in the face, and she scrunched her nose. "I know. I'm sorry. It's Anja. I tried to mask it." I apologized quickly. "Where is she?" she asked with a nod of understanding. "Upstairs. First door on your left. You can't miss it. Just follow the singing," I instructed. Samantha gave me a strange look when I said this. Her expression was somewhere between confusion and uncertainty, though she didn't say anything else as she headed upstairs to find my wife. She probably didn't believe me. It did sound a little outlandish if I'm honest with myself, and I trailed after her anxiously. It's fair to say the days past had really taken their toll on me, and I was by now little more than a nervous wreck, but I wanted to be there when Samantha confronted my wife about her delusions. When we reached the bathroom, Samantha pushed the door open slowly and softly called my wife's name. The seconds after passed tensely as she received no response, and I saw her eyes grow wide as she covered her mouth with a trembling hand. I could tell she was entering into shock. I know, maybe I shouldn't have left it this long to call you, but she was so insistent on staying in the tub. Can you help her? I confessed and asked uncertainly. Help her? She stammered, turning to me, and her expression relaying both disbelief and horror. I could see that behind her eyes, her thoughts were traveling at 1,000,000 miles an hour as she tried to catch up to what she was seeing, and something in her mannerisms got to me, and I began to panic. My heart began to thump heavily inside my chest. It seemed like the world was suddenly spinning more slowly, and as gravity crushed down on me, I realized that Anja was silent for the first time in days. Frantic, I pushed past Samantha to gain entry into the room where I saw for the first time the truth. The room was destroyed. Signs of a struggle were evident everywhere I looked, and my wife was there, motionless and decaying in the bath. She was half submerged in the water, leaning back against the tub edge. Her eyes were glazed over, and she stared at me lifelessly. The water around her had putrefied. She had dark mats on her throat, and her skin was swollen with liquid. Slowly, the realization dawned on me that she had been dead for days, and I swallowed hard as I looked over my own body. The scratches on my arms, the bruises, the bite marks. She had tried to fight. I've always had a weak heart, not just physically. I've always been afraid of my own shadow. It was surprising when the doctors told me my heart murmur wasn't just a heart murmur. A year of tests, a year of therapy, constant trips to the hospital, and I was finally told that it had all been for nothing. My poor, weak heart wouldn't last till Christmas. It's a strange thing being told that you're dying. I didn't come to terms with it at first. I drank and I spent my money. I did reckless, stupid things because I was so damn scared. Then I got the news that a young woman called Laura had been declared brain dead, and that I, the lucky chosen one, would be getting a brand new heart a week later. I drove to the hospital slowly, carefully, and readied myself for the ordeal that was to come. As I was laying in bed on the last night, the thought of Laura swirled around in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like her name was in flashing lights every time I closed my eyes. It was wrong. I know it was. But I had to see the woman who was giving me her heart. It didn't feel right not to put a face to the one who was saving my life. I knew her name. I knew what ward she was staying on. I had overheard the two nurses discussing it. I wandered down the meandering hallways until I found what I was looking for, taking my time, making sure I didn't miss any name. I guess I had time on my hands now. In the second last room, she lay in bed. A woman sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand, and my own weak heart stuttered. "Excuse me." I had no idea what to say to her. "I'm Jenna. I'm the person, I'm having surgery tomorrow," and what I assumed was Laura's mother stood up, and I could tell from the look in her eye that she knew who I was. "Thank you for visiting. I know it's strange, but a part of her is going to be living on in you. I wanted to meet you." I stood there helpless and lost for words. Laura's mother beckoned me over. "Please," she said, "don't feel uncomfortable. It's what she would have wanted." I sat on the chair next to Laura. How did she... I broke off. It was too awful to ask. Laura's mother gave me a thin smile. She was a care worker, looking after battered wives, abused women. Last month, she met a guy, and, well, I suppose years of training can't help you when you're in love. She ignored the warning signs, and he killed her. She dedicated her life to those who needed her. Laura's mother looked down. I didn't know why I did it, but I reached over and held Laura's hand. I squeezed it. I'm so sorry. I had a boyfriend once who... He was like that too. Someone like Laura convinced me to leave. Laura's mother gave me another half smile. I could see the tears in her eyes. Then Laura squeezed my hand, tightly. She gripped me so hard that her fingernails dug into my skin. I recoiled, a look of horror on my face. Laura's mother looked at me calmly. She squeezes my hand sometimes as well. I think the doctors called it muscle spasms. Either way, there's none of Laura left in there anymore. I looked at the small crescent moons that had just started to bleed on the palm of my hand. The surgery went perfectly. I was wheeled to the recovery suite after it was over and done with, the raised wound on my chest covered by gauze. It was better if I didn't see it, I thought. I didn't need any more heart issues. I spent the first day doped up on the pain medication, eating only a little and sitting up maybe 2 times. It was a long process, they reassured me. Laura's mother came to visit me the day before I was due to leave. Her calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but I could see that she was suffering. She looked 10 years older, and her hands shook when she gave me a hug. When are you going home? Tomorrow, I told her. Please come visit whenever you want. I started to jot down my address for her when out of the corner of my eye, a flash of blonde disappeared through the doorway. The same brilliant blonde as Laura's hair. Ow! I cried out suddenly. It felt like someone had sharply squeezed my hand so hard it almost crushed the bones. Laura's mother rushed to my side, a look of concern in her eyes. What's wrong? Is it your heart? She stumbled over the last words, coming to terms with what she had said. I tried to reassure her and said I'd let the doctors know, and she left with a look of worry on her face. When I looked down, a new set of crescent fingernail marks were below the ones that Laura's had made. 10 identical bleeding smiles. The taxi ride home was short, and before I knew it, I was back in my own flat. It felt strange to try and slot back into where I had left off. My life had been almost over the last time I had been there. I looked over the mess in the cardboard boxes, the remnants of one night where I had tearfully tried to pack and store my belongings, so my parents wouldn't have to do it when I died. Laura's heart beat so strongly it felt like it would come out of my chest. It did this all the time, and I realized this is what a healthy heart must feel like. So why couldn't I shake my feeling of unease? That night, I had a dream. Laura was in her hospital bed, but her mother was gone. I could hear my heart, Laura's heart, beating in my eardrums so loudly it was painful. I tried to cover them, but my hands were pinned to my sides. Some unexplainable force was moving me towards the motionless figure of Laura on the bed. Her lips were blue, and the window had come open, whipping her blonde hair around her face. I was almost on top of her when her eyes flew open. They were milky white, the eyes of someone dead. "Get out," she rasped, her voice guttural. I could hear the heartbeat faster and faster, drumming until I thought I couldn't take it anymore. Then I woke up. The sound had been real. Laura's heart was so loud, it felt like it would rupture in my eardrums, and I screamed in agony, trying to cover my ears. It was useless. It was coming from some deep place inside me. I could feel it reverberating around the hollows of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and tried to find my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone, an ambulance, or my mom. Anyone that would pick up. "Get out," It was a faint whisper over the hammering thumps of Laura's heart. A low, guttural voice that sounded like it had been made by an animal. And I crawled to the door, down the hallway, choking on my screams for help. My neighbor opened the door, his eyes as wide as saucers, at the sight of me on the floor clutching my chest. He drove me to the hospital, as I cried in the passenger seat of his car. After about 50 different checkups, the doctors told me that absolutely nothing was wrong with me. They told me my heart was regular, my blood pressure was normal, and that everything was going just swimmingly. I stood in the waiting area, wallowing in my shame and frustration. That heart didn't belong to me. My phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown caller. Great. That was all I needed. More unexplained, scary things like a stranger on the end of the phone. My voice sounded small on the line. Hello? Good morning. This is the Thames Valley Police. We've called to report an incident that occurred in your flat at around 1:30 a.m. today. I felt a wave of embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I recently had surgery and I wasn't feeling well. I had to have my neighbor drive me to the hospital, and I think I panicked a little in the hallway before I left. There was a small silence on the other end of the phone. I'm afraid this is something you might want to be sitting down for. I felt Laura's heartbeats, strong and calm. There was an incident of forced entry by Mr. Samuel Matthews. According to our police records, he's your ex-partner, and you filed a restraining order against him in September 2017. My blood ran cold. I did? He's in police custody. We found an automatic weapon on him, and we believe he had the intent to harm you. We have an officer currently stationed at your flat who can fill you in depending on how long your hospital stay will be. I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a moment, I leaned against the wall, the horror slowly spreading over me. If I had been in my flat 10 minutes later, he would have found me. Laura's heartbeats filled my ears again, but now they were gentle, calming. Her mother said she dedicated every part of her to helping those who needed it. I put both hands on my chest, overwhelmed by my own gratitude, and listened to Laura. I work in security at Disney World, the happiest place on earth. Typically, I wouldn't say where I work, as obviously there are some pretty strict rules about things employees can put online. But I just don't think I can tell this properly without that context. And honestly, I think this may be it for me anyway with this job. I just can't see myself working here any longer now. I've been with the company for 23 years. The first 20 years I worked in the parks, nabbing shoplifters and rounding up people who were drinking too much for the heat. Occasionally there'd be a fight to break up, but people usually kept it pretty mild. The heat and walking was getting too much for me the last few days, so I asked to be transferred somewhere with AC, and the company moved me to one of the resorts. While the working conditions were 110% better as far as climate and comfort go, the guest issues were trickier, mainly domestics. I guess the expenses and stress of vacation got to a lot of people, and I'd be called by neighboring rooms because some mom and dad were yelling at each other. I tried to suggest that they'd take a nap or go do separate activities for a bit, and that would usually calm them down. But none of that is what I'm here for. I've got to get this out while I have time. 3 days ago, I got a call from management. Apparently a couple of days before that, housekeeping had went into a room that should have been turned over that day. Turned over is when one guest leaves by about 11 a.m. and the next guest checks in around 3 p.m. And all of the guests' items were still in the room. Housekeeping made note of it and moved on. But during the next 2 days when they entered the room, everything was still there and untouched. I went to check it out, and sure enough, there was an empty room full of luggage, clothes, snacks, some toys, everything a family would need for vacation. The manager had already looked up the previous reservation, and it was for a family. Dad, mom, 2 little kids. I tried to call the phone numbers they had given, but all I got was voicemail. We were a bit stumped, so I made the call that housekeeper could clean the room and take the family's personal items to be held until we got into contact with someone. I went digging into the reservation more. The family had arrived 5 days before housekeeping discovered all of their stuff. I found that the family had paid a parking fee, and their vehicle description was listed. A quick walk of the parking lots and I had easily located their vehicle, so that ruled out a car accident or them deciding to just leave all their stuff behind. Next, I saw that they had bought a dining plan. This is when a guest prepays for all their food. They're given a certain number of credits to use for meals. This family had only used 3 credits, and the last one was 2 days after they checked in. It appeared that the day they arrived, they got here late and probably just stayed on the resort. The next day they used 2 credits at Epcot. The second park day they used just 1 credit at Magic Kingdom, and it was at breakfast time. Now at Disney we have something called Magic Bands. Magic Bands are worn by the guests and act as a room key, park ticket, credit card, dining reservation payment, Fast Pass, a system used to bypass lines, and more. It took some work, but I was finally able to look up this family's Fast Pass history. The day they went to Magic Kingdom, they had breakfast at a restaurant in the park, rode a couple of rides, and then rode their last ride. It's a small world, around 11 a.m. Then nothing. Finally, it was time to bring in someone else on this. I called an old co-worker at Magic Kingdom and asked him to pull security footage for It's a Small World at the time they wrote it, and I made my way over there. When I got there, my friend was very confused, almost distraught looking. He showed me what he found. There's usually a camera in the direction where rides load and unload. The footage showed them scanning their bands to use fast passes for the ride and boarding the ride. The footage from the exit of the ride just showed the other people in their car exiting. They weren't there. Of course, we thought the worst. Maybe one of the kids had fallen out and mom and dad and the other kid got off in the middle of the ride to help, and they all got injured or killed or stuck in machinery somewhere. So we shut down the ride, middle of the damn day, turned off that earworm music and turned up the lights. Me and my buddy walked that ride 3 times before we called in help. Eventually, there was close to 10 cast members searching, and we didn't find anything except for 3 cell phones and a hat. I was right stumped. I've kept digging the past couple of days, and I'm not sure who to tell what I found next to. I've called the police, and I suppose they're on their way, but the company has a way of covering up things like this, and I decided I can't live with myself if I don't put out some type of warning. I kept digging into the reservation over the last couple days, and today I noticed they had purchased a memory maker. There are photographers all over the parks, and cameras in a lot of the rides, and with Memory Maker, the photos are all free. They automatically get added to a guest's Disney account when the system knows their picture has been taken. And the system always knows. Everyone's whereabouts are always known with the magic bands. Well, I opened up their Memory Maker photo album, and I swear there's 732 pictures. The first 30 or so are pretty normal. Epcot, a few rides in front of the castle, but the rest are all in It's a Small World. The rides only take 1 picture per go-around, so it appears as though this family has ridden this ride over 700 times. The first picture was pretty normal. Everyone looked happy. It was a busy day and a full car of guests. The next one is rough to look at. The car is empty, except for this little family, and they look so darn confused. The next 10 to 15, I can see Dad getting angry, yelling. Mom is holding on to those 2 kids like her life depends on it, and you can see the kids getting increasingly upset, crying. And it goes on, and on, and on. And after 50 or so, it looks like they're trying to get out. In one, the dad is missing. In another, they're all gone. Maybe like they've bailed early in the ride and tried to walk out. But in the very next one, they're all right back in that damn car. After around 4:50 or so, I only see the mom and kids. It's just, when I look closely, I can see Dad, maybe just his body now, slumped down in one of the other seats. Since about 675, there's just Mom and one kid, another body in another seat. The mom and kid aren't moving anymore. I think them two are still alive, just damn near catatonic, looking straight ahead, pale. And y'all, I swear on my life, the dolls are moving or something. In some of these pictures, I can tell they aren't where they should be. I even saw one with a doll in the car with this family. I can't look anymore, or I'm going to lose my lunch. I closed the album. Its file size has increased since it closed. God, are there new pictures being added? I see on security cameras that the local PD just arrived, so they'll soon take over. I wish I knew what the hell is going on, but I also wish this damn thing had never landed in my lap. I don't think I'll be able to update after this. After I talk to the police, I think I'm going to walk out of here and never come back. I just wanted to get this out there, before Disney feeds the media some bullcrap cover-up as to why a whole family vanished. They didn't vanish. I know where they are.